Imagine, for a moment, a silence so deep that it presses against you like invisible hands. There is no sound because there is nothing to make sound. No stars to glimmer, no sky to stretch above, no earth to lie beneath your feet. Not even darkness in the way we think of it, because darkness implies a space that can be filled with light. Here there is not even the possibility of light. Only an infinite gulf, a breathless stillness, waiting. This is where the Norse cosmos begins, not with the blazing roar of a big bang, not with the elegant unfolding of a divine plan, but with a gap. A gap so vast, so profound, that the very language of the Old Norse people struggled to contain it. They called it Ginnungagap, the mighty gap, the yawning chasm, the great emptiness that stretched between everything and nothing. But to call it empty is to miss the point. This was no dead void. It was raw potential. The storytellers of the North imagined it as a place pregnant with meaning, like a vast womb of the cosmos. It was not safe, not comforting, but it was waiting, as though holding its breath for the first moment of creation. On one side of this endless gulf, there lay Niflheim, the world of mist. Cold, ancient, and heavy with ice, Niflheim was not a land of gentle winter snow but a place of brutal, unforgiving cold. Its very air was sharp enough to cut, and its rivers, known as the Ylvigar, ran with a venomous, freezing substance that burned like frostbite. From its heart swirled a well of terrible power called Hvergelmir, from which those icy rivers flowed out, snaking their way toward the center of Ginnungagap. On the opposite side burned Muspel, a land of fire so fierce that no mortal or god could walk its ground unscathed. The flames leapt and howled eternally, a living inferno that threatened to consume all. At its edge stood Surt, the first fire giant, a towering figure wielding a flaming sword brighter than the sun. He was the guardian of Muspel, a sentinel who would one day march out at the end of days. But for now he waited, as though the fire itself was aware that its time had not yet come. Between these two extremes stretched Ginnungagap, wide and silent, holding back the meeting of frost and flame. It was as if the universe itself hesitated, suspended between deathly cold and consuming heat. But such balance could not last forever. The Norse myths tell us that the Ylvigar rivers kept flowing, their icy poison pushing further into the emptiness, until they began to freeze solid. The rime grew thicker, layer upon layer, like a cosmic glacier creeping outward. And as it grew, the cold reached further into the void. Then, from the far side, the heat of Muspel began to reach outward too. Sparks flew across the void, tiny motes of burning light. And when the frost and the sparks met in the middle of Ginnungagap, something strange happened. The ice did not merely melt, it quickened. It came alive. In that first meeting of opposites, the silence of Ginnungagap was broken. From the dripping ice, a shape began to form, a shape so vast that it dwarfed everything around it. This was Ymir, the first living being, the ancestor of all giants. The storytellers called him the Hrimurs, the frost giant, a creature born from chaos itself. Imagine him awakening there in the darkness, the first breath of life fogging the chill air. His massive limbs stretched across the void, his skin a strange mixture of frost and fire's warmth, as though creation itself could not decide what he was meant to be. And from Ymir, more life came into being, though not in the way we might expect. As he slept, his body sweated, and from the sweat of his armpits sprang the first man and woman of the Jotnar race. From his legs came another child, born in a manner strange enough to make even the old storytellers raise an eyebrow. The myths do not shy away from this. They tell us plainly that life did not need order's permission to exist. It simply was. But Ymir was not the only thing to be born in that silent gap. As the ice continued to melt, another figure appeared, one of the most unusual and important creatures in Norse myth, a cow. But not just any cow. Her name was Auðhumla, and she was enormous, shining, and benevolent. From her great udders flowed 4 rivers of milk, enough to nourish the colossal Ymir. And so, in the middle of that cosmic void, giant and cow became the first companions, the first relationship in the history of existence. But Auðhumla had her own task. She needed food, and so she began to lick the salty ice that had formed in Ginnungagap. Day after day she licked, patient and tireless, until the shape of a man began to emerge from the ice itself. Little by little she freed him, until at last he stood tall and whole, Buri, the first of the gods. Buri was strong and noble, a shining figure in the empty gap. And from him would come the bloodline of the Aesir, the gods who would one day rule the 9 realms. Already destiny was stirring. On one side Ymir and his chaotic offspring, the frost giants, multiplying and spreading through the void. On the other side Vili, the ancestor of those who would bring order and shape to the cosmos. The stage was now set. Ginnungagap, which had once been still and silent, now teemed with life. The frost still crackled, the fires still burned, and between them stalked giants whose footsteps shook the emptiness. Somewhere in that void Vili's son Bor would take Bestla, one of Ymir's descendants, as his wife. And from their union would come 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Vili, whose names would soon be written across the fabric of the cosmos. But before they could shape the world they would first have to face Ymir, the being from whom everything began. And Ginnungagap, the mighty Gap, would witness the first great battle of existence. A battle that would drown the void in blood and transform it forever. And so, the 3 brothers, Odin, Vili, and Vili, opened their eyes to a Ginnungagap already filled with the rumbling steps of giants. Everywhere they turned Ymir's descendants were growing, multiplying, their voices like thunder rolling through the void. They were creatures of raw, untamed nature, embodiments of a world that had not yet learned the meaning of order. The brothers watched, and in their watching they understood that something had to be done. For though Ymir was the first of all living things, he was also dangerous. He was not merely a creature, he was chaos given form. His enormous body, his strange offspring, his very existence threatened to overrun all possibility of balance. There could be no place for peace, no place for growth, no place for anything to flourish while Ymir lived unchecked. The decision could not have been an easy one. Imagine it, Odin and his brothers staring up at the giant who was in a way their own ancestor, deciding that he must die. It was a decision that would forever shape the destiny of gods and mortals alike. But the brothers were resolute. The void had given them life, but it had also given them purpose. They were not here to merely exist, they were here to create. And so they made war. It was the first war the cosmos had ever seen, and Ginnungagap itself seemed to tremble beneath the clash. There are no detailed accounts of this battle, no poetic stanzas telling of every blow, only the terrible conclusion. Odin, Vili, and Vili struck Ymir down. The giant fell, and as he did, his lifeblood gushed out in a flood so massive that it drowned nearly all of his children. Those few who survived, a man and a woman of the Jotnar, fled to the far reaches of the world, vowing to rebuild their race and someday have vengeance. But the brothers did not stop there. Where others might have seen a corpse, they saw building material. For this was their purpose, to shape the raw chaos into something meaningful, something ordered, something that could endure. And so they began the great work of creation. They dragged Ymir's colossal body into the center of Ginnungagap and began to craft the world from it. His flesh became the earth, the ground we walk upon. His blood became the oceans, lakes, and rivers that crisscross the world. His massive bones were turned into mountains, his teeth and jawbones into rocks and crags. His hair they scattered, making the forests. And then, perhaps most awe-inspiring of all, they took his skull and raised it up, fashioning the very sky from it. 4 dwarves, Nordri, Sudri, Ostri, and Vestri, were set at each corner to hold the dome of the heavens aloft, their tiny but tireless bodies keeping the sky from collapsing. But there was still the problem of light. The dome of the sky was empty, black, and silent. And so Odin and his brothers took sparks from the eternal fires of Muspel and flung them into the heavens. Some became stars, scattered across the vault of night like glittering embers. Others became the sun and the moon, wheeling endlessly across the sky to mark the passage of day and night. Still, the world was not yet safe. The Jotnar who survived the flood of Ymir's blood would surely come seeking vengeance. And so the brothers used Ymir's eyebrows to create a great fortress, a protective wall encircling the realm they had made. Within this enclosure they shaped Midgard, the middle enclosure, the world of men. But a world without people is an empty stage. So one day as the 3 brothers walked along the shore, they found 2 pieces of driftwood lying there, worn smooth by sea and time. They took them up, and together they breathed life into them. Odin gave them breath, the very spark of life. Vili gave them consciousness, the ability to think and feel. Vili gave them form and the senses with which to experience the world. Thus were born Ask and Embla, the first man and woman, the ancestors of all humankind. The world now had shape. It had light and dark, land and sea, sky and stars. It had living beings, gods, giants, men, and with them came the first stories, the first choices, the first conflicts. The great gap, once empty, now echoed with voices and footsteps, with the roar of oceans and the howl of winds. Ginnungagap had been filled. But the memory of that vast silence never fully vanished. Even in the brightness of day, even in the laughter of men and the feasts of gods, somewhere beyond the edges of the sky, Ginnungagap remained. The Norse people believed that it would not remain quiet forever. They knew that all things are part of a great cycle. What is born must one day die, and what dies will someday be born again. In time, the world would see wars between gods and giants, treachery and blood feuds, heroes rising and falling, fates woven by the Norns at the base of Yggdrasil, the world tree. And at last, when the appointed hour came, fire and ice would meet again, not to create but to destroy. Surt, the guardian of Muspel, would lead his fire giants across the Bifrost bridge, shattering it behind them. The sky would split open, the earth would quake, and the oceans would rise as Jormungandr, the world serpent, thrashed in fury. Fenrir would break his chains, and the gods themselves would ride to battle one final time. The world that Odin and his brothers made from Ymir's body would be burned, drowned, and shattered. And in the end, everything would fall back into silence. Perhaps then Ginnungagap would wait again, empty and patient, until a new spark of creation flickered into life, and a new world began to take shape. The Norse myths are not afraid of endings, they embrace them. To them, creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin. Ginnungagap is both the cradle and the grave, the beginning and the promise of renewal. And in this, there is something strangely comforting. Even when everything ends, even when all is returned to the void, the story does not stop. It waits, quietly, until it can begin again. So next time you gaze at the stars, remember that once they were sparks flying across a cosmic void, set there by three brothers who dared to shape the world. Remember that the ground beneath your feet was once the body of a giant, and that the oceans that crash on distant shores were once his blood. Remember that everything you see, the mountains, the forests, even the clouds overhead, is part of that ancient story, a story that began with a gap and may one day return to it. And perhaps as you think of that great silence, you will feel a shiver, not of fear but of wonder. Because Ginnungagap is not just a place at the edge of time. It is a reminder that the universe is alive, that it is forever balancing between chaos and order, destruction and creation. And we are part of that balance, tiny but significant, living out our own brief moments on the stage the gods prepared for us. If you have enjoyed this journey into the void, let yourself linger in its echoes a little longer. Like this video, if you felt the chill of Ginnungagap in your bones, share it with someone who loves a good story, and subscribe to Mythic Odyssey for more journeys into the world's oldest myths. And tell me in the comments, when you think about the great nothingness before creation, does it terrify you, or does it make you curious about what might come next?